For decades, the United States had one advantage no empire in history had ever possessed. We controlled the global financial system, not just the dollar, not just the banks, not just Wall Street, the infrastructure itself. If you wanted oil traded internationally, dollars. If you wanted global reserve assets, treasuries. If you wanted safety during crisis, U.S. debt. America became the financial center of the world because the entire planet trusted the system underneath it. But now, that system is beginning to crack, not collapse overnight, not hyperinflation tomorrow morning, not Mad Max, something much more dangerous, slow deterioration, because the United States government is now approaching $40 trillion in debt, $40 trillion. And most people still do not understand what that actually means. The government doesn't just owe $40 trillion like a guy with a maxed out credit card. The real issue is refinancing, rolling debt, servicing debt, maintaining demand for debt, because the modern American economy, and frankly the global economy, runs on confidence in the Treasury market. And here's the problem nobody wants to talk about. What happens when the cost of financing the empire becomes too expensive for the empire itself? That is the real threat. Not tanks, not missiles, not even recession. Interest expense. And if that sounds insane, it shouldn't. Because for the first time in modern American history, the United States government is paying astronomical amounts of money just to service existing debt. Not build infrastructure, not cure disease, not modernize energy, not rebuild manufacturing, just interest, just carrying costs. The same thing that destroys households, destroys nations. And here's where this conversation gets controversial, because I believe the United States government is approaching this entire problem with a 20th century financial system in a 21st century world. I think America is defending old financial plumbing while the rest of the world is digitizing capital itself. And whether people like it or not, the next evolution of sovereign finance is probably going to involve tokenization. Not meme coins, not JPEGs, not crypto bros, real infrastructure, real assets, real debt markets, which leads to a radical question. What if the United States government eventually tokenized portions of its debt market, not to eliminate debt, not to print magic money, but to modernize the largest capital market on earth? Because if America is going to refinance tens of trillions of dollars over the coming decades, then every single basis point matters. And reducing friction in the global treasury system could become one of the most important economic strategies of the 21st century. The real problem isn't the debt, it's the interest. People hear $40 trillion and immediately imagine collapse. That's not how sovereign debt crises work. Empires don't usually explode overnight. They decay under the weight of financing costs. Rome debased currency. European empires drowned in war debt. Britain eventually lost financial dominance after exhausting itself maintaining global obligations. History repeats itself differently every time, but the mechanism is usually similar. The cost of maintaining the system eventually overwhelms the productivity of the system itself. And the United States is entering dangerous territory because, unlike a household, the U.S. government constantly refinances debt. Treasury bills mature, Treasury notes mature, Treasury bonds mature, and they must continuously be rolled into new issuance, which means interest rates matter enormously. If rates stay elevated long enough, servicing costs explode, and suddenly the government is borrowing money to pay interest on borrowed money, which sounds absurd because it is absurd. Now combine that with aging demographics, entitlement obligations, military spending, industrial policy, infrastructure demands, and geopolitical competition with China. The fiscal pressure becomes enormous. And here's the uncomfortable truth. America cannot afford for global demand for treasuries to weaken materially. The treasury market is the backbone of the entire system, which means preserving demand for U.S. debt becomes a national strategic priority. That's where tokenization becomes interesting. The financial system is still running on old rails. Most people assume modern finance is futuristic. It isn't. Underneath the surface, much of global finance still operates on systems that look ancient compared to modern technology. Settlement delays, intermediaries everywhere, restricted access, banking windows, clearing friction, geographic barriers, institutional gatekeepers. The global financial system still largely operates on rails built decades ago. Now compare that to what technology allows today: instant settlement, fractional ownership, 24/7 trading, global participation, programmable financial assets, transparent ledgers, reduced operational friction. That is why tokenization matters. And again, this is where people get confused. Tokenization is not the same thing as speculative crypto gambling. Tokenization is infrastructure. It is simply the digitization of ownership and transfer systems. That's it. A tokenized treasury bond is still a treasury bond. The United States government still owes the money. The holder still receives yield. But the infrastructure surrounding issuance, trading, settlement, custody, and access becomes radically more efficient. That matters, especially at sovereign scale, because tiny efficiencies become massive at $40 trillion. What tokenized treasuries could actually do. Now let's think this through seriously. Imagine a world where portions of U.S. Treasury issuance become tokenized, not replacing traditional bonds overnight, not destroying banks, not eliminating Wall Street, just modernization. Now suddenly, global investors can access treasuries more directly, settlement becomes near instant, liquidity potentially increases, operational costs decline, fractional ownership expands participation, and treasury products become programmable financial infrastructure. That changes things, because the treasury market isn't just an American market, it's the foundation of global collateral. The world uses treasuries everywhere: banking systems, repo markets, sovereign reserves, institutional portfolios, pensions, insurance companies, derivatives markets. Now imagine if the most important collateral asset on Earth evolved technologically. That's not some fringe crypto idea. That's geopolitical financial infrastructure, and here's the bombshell. If modernization increases demand and liquidity for treasuries, even modestly, it could potentially lower borrowing costs over time. Even tiny reductions matter. 1% matters enormously at sovereign scale. 0.5% matters enormously. Basis points matter, because we are no longer talking about millions. We are talking about trillions. The United States is risking falling behind. This is the part that should concern people. The world is moving whether Washington likes it or not. Stablecoins are exploding globally. Tokenized money market funds already exist. Major institutions are experimenting with tokenized assets. Governments around the world are studying CBDCs and digital financial infrastructure. BlackRock is paying attention. JP Morgan is paying attention. Franklin Templeton is paying attention. The infrastructure transition is already happening, slowly, quietly, then suddenly. And America risks making the same mistake empires always make, confusing current dominance with permanent dominance, because financial systems evolve. The Dutch once dominated global finance, then Britain, then America. Nothing is guaranteed forever. The next era of financial dominance may belong to whichever nation controls digital settlement, tokenized collateral, programmable capital markets, and global liquidity infrastructure, not just military power, financial infrastructure power. That's the next battlefield. And right now, the United States government still largely behaves like the internet is optional. And now let's be honest. A lot of people will immediately hate this idea. Some because they hear the word tokenization and mentally shut down. Others because entire industries are built around the current financial system. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because massive legacy structures profit from friction, intermediaries profit from complexity, gatekeepers profit from exclusivity. Entire ecosystems exist around the current treasury infrastructure, so modernization threatens people. Not because it cannot work, but because efficient systems tend to compress margins. That happens in every industry technology touches: media, retail, transportation, communications, now finance, and eventually sovereign finance. The question is not whether modernization comes. The question is who controls it when it does. America, China, private corporations, global banking consortiums, a decentralized network nobody fully controls? That question matters, because whoever controls the next generation of financial infrastructure may shape the next century of global power. This is really about saving the dollar, and this is the irony. The people most hostile to modernization may unintentionally become the people most dangerous to the dollar itself, because preserving reserve currency status requires adaptation, not complacency. The dollar became dominant because America built the most powerful, liquid, trusted financial system on earth, not because destiny guaranteed it forever. And if the financial system is evolving toward programmable digital infrastructure, then refusing to evolve becomes dangerous, especially when America is carrying historic debt burdens. The U.S. government does not just need fiscal reform, it needs infrastructure reform, capital market reform, debt market modernization, because eventually the entire Treasury market may need to become more liquid, more global, more programmable, more accessible, and more technologically efficient, not weaker, more powerful. That's the key distinction. Tokenization is not necessarily the destruction of American financial dominance. It may become the mechanism that preserves it. The biggest mistake people make when discussing debt is assuming the future will look exactly like the past. It won't. The financial system is changing. Capital markets are changing. Money itself is evolving. And somewhere in Washington, eventually, serious people are going to realize something. You cannot refinance 21st century debt burdens forever using 20th century infrastructure, especially when the rest of the world is digitizing finance in real time. The next Bretton Woods may not happen in a hotel conference room, it may happen on-chain, and the nation that controls the next generation of financial infrastructure may control the next generation of global power itself, not because it has the most gold, not because it has the biggest army, but because it built the most efficient capital markets on earth. And in a world drowning in debt, efficiency becomes power.